Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Rotary Club of Livermore. Nice to see so many friendly faces in the house today, behind masks. I know they're friendly behind their masks. So, again, just a little Zoom etiquette reminder for those of you in Zoom land, if you can please mute yourself when you're not speaking, and if you are speaking, please unmute yourself. So, the pledge. Jack, would you be willing to lead us in the pledge today?
Everybody take the flag. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So we've got a special treat. 2/3 of the songsters are live and in person with us today at Robert Livermore Community Center. So here we are going to get to experience some live music. So songsters, come on up.
Okay. First of all, it's really good to see all your faces. This is pretty amazing that we've all been like stashed at home. And not that I don't mind Zoom, but this is really nice to see. And I had to get out of the house, so I convinced Stu to come out of the house. And he's masked up, and I am too. But we're all boosted. No, you're not. I'm not? Okay. Well, so are you ready somewhere? Yeah. You know what? We needed all the blessings we can get. And so I decided we'll do God Bless America because we need it. Okay. All right. 3. God bless America, the land that I love. Stand beside
her,
God,
hide her,
from the mountains to the prairie, to the ocean, white as bone. God bless America, my home sweet home. God bless America, my home. Oh, you can. I can hear you on Zoom. Woo!
Thanks, you guys. That's fun. That's nice to hear. Okay, next up, thought for the day. Carol, what do you got for us?
Those of you who don't know me, I'm Carol Garrett. I'll only be able to do it part of the time. Okay? You think maybe a little shorter? I have a few props today with my thought.
Sure, you have true stuff.
Okay. Before my hip surgery, I could bend down and do this, but picture that I'm taking this shoe, taking off this one and putting on this shoe. Actually, I put it on this foot. And I do that on this foot. So who am I? Right. I am realizing how much Rotary is like Mr. Rogers. In Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, every one of his neighbors is his neighbor. No exceptions. Everybody is his neighbor. And he went out of his way to be a friend to all kinds of people. I know because I watched Mr. Rogers for many years with my children. Rotary is like Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. We delight in and serve the entire world. People who are needy, people who are caring, and people who are leaders. I don't know if Mr. Rogers was a Rotarian, but he sure would have made a good one.
Thank you, Carol. Very nice. So our front line today, the people that make these meetings go, out there in Zoom world, Pat Coyle holding down our Zoom host duties. Pat, thank you very much. Trish Monroe actually had a conflict today. Will Bateson stepped up. Will, thank you, covering for Spur Reporter. Appreciate it. Audio visual, Alan Frank is actually assembling a team to help with our audio visual, and I am super excited. I've heard rumor that Alan might want to go on vacation someday, so this is great that we actually have some other people training to figure out how these hybrid meetings work. So Dennis and Paul, thank you very much for stepping in. In 2 weeks you want to go on vacation? Oh, okay, we'll see. Zoom chat monitor, David Rounds out there. Again, people be careful what you say on Zoom. It's being recorded for posterity. Spur publisher, Kathy Coyle. Thank you, Kathy. And Niall, I want to thank you for jumping in and helping out. Niall is operating the cameras for us here at Robert Livermore. So thank you all. So this is the point where we usually welcome visiting Rotarians and guests. I see we have some guests here. I know we got our speaker with us, and we'll get to you shortly. Thank you for joining us. But Wendy, it looks like you've got a guest. Welcome, Carl. So for those of you on Zoom that might have not heard Wendy brought her husband Carl to join us today. So how about out there in Zoom? I apologize, I'm a little blind on who's out there in Zoom land. Do we have any guests joining us via Zoom today?
I don't see any.
Okay, all right. Thanks, David, for checking in, checking on that. So announcements. We've got a couple of announcements today. Where are we going to start? Cloud Cafe. So Splin, I saw you out there. Do you want to speak to this or do you want me to?
Please do, Ken.
Okay. So
Remember, I only want to deliver good news. You get to deliver bad news.
oh, that's right. That's how this works, right? Okay. Your turn next year, buddy. So Splin and Sonia have been working really hard trying to find a lunch option for us, right? We're starting to get kind of into the groove of meeting in person again. And while these faces are smiling, I know you're hungry too, right? So we're trying to figure out a way to get lunch here. First swing didn't work out exactly the way we thought it was going to, but we're going to continue working on that, right? So stay tuned. We'll try and figure out lunch options for everybody pretty soon. So Splin, thanks for your efforts on that. Next up, so maybe this is Ken's freestyling section. A couple of reminders, or you know what, Pat, I know you're out there. I think you and Gowd wanted to give everybody a reminder about the ear, nose, throat project that we're trying to support. Can you?
Yeah, thanks so much, Ken. Just a brief reminder about this. I know that several people have joined in, but just remember, Gowd is willing to match donations to this cause. It's to detect early childhood deafness so it can be treated and those kids can learn how to talk. And think of the impact if they don't. And this is in the community where he went to high school in India. It's just a few miles away from his hometown. The key thing is he needs to gather up the donations and see what he's got and then share that with the Rotarians who are putting the global grant together and do his match. So if you're thinking about this, my advice is stop thinking about it and just make your donation so that we can wrap this up for Gowd and he can go ahead and do this good in the part of the world that he's from. Gowd, do you have any other additions?
No, just simple request. Every amount counts, small or big. So I think goal is to meet that 14,000 and for the global grant.
So thank you very much, Ken, for letting us remind people.
Excellent. And Pat, nice selection on your background there, choosing the Rotary People of Action backdrop there as you are inspiring us to take action. So, Don Wentz, do you want to give us a quick update on the crab feed?
Yes, the crab feed is coming. It's actually going to happen this year, hopefully. February 4th, at the Swan Center. Remember 2 or 3 years ago, we used to meet there? It's going to be the same place. It's going to be a little more expensive this year. We had to raise the price because they raised the price of crab on us at least double. So, and you probably have been reading in the paper, restaurant prices, food prices are going up. So we thought this is a fair price. It's all for charity. So anyway, we now have the package. If you want to get a table of 8, 9, or 10 guests, you get a $5 discount per person on that table. And you can sign up right here today with one of these sheets. Debbie has them in the back, or I can give sheets out if you want to take them home and think about it. Or you can sign up by yourself. You can also purchase wine and drink tickets with this too. So I encourage you to do that, do it early, so we get an idea how many people are going to show up. Secondly, there's going to be a crab feed meeting tonight, and I think there's only another crab feed. Sorry, it's tomorrow night, Thursday night, at 5 o'clock at the Travel Bug. Thank you. So hopefully there's some more members out there in video land. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Don. And thanks everybody that's helping out to make that go, right? It'll be fun to kind of start to get back to some sense of normal and be able to have some fun together. So we're all looking forward to that. Another miscellaneous reminder, Marianne Roja wasn't able to join us today. She's traveling, but she wanted me to remind everyone that the mini grant deadline for this next cycle is today. So if you know of anybody that works to deadlines, kind of tends to put things off until the very last minute, you might want to remind them that this is the last minute and they need to get their applications in. Marianne also wanted me to remind everybody that the Rotarian Foundation of Livermore grant deadline is a week from today, next Wednesday. So if you know of organizations that are doing good in the local community and could use a little bit more financial support than we would normally give through our mini grants, you want to steer those folks to the foundation. So, did I forget anything? Anybody else got an announcement? All right. Okay, so next week, Ed Lyon, CEO of Socher Insurance, is going to be speaking to us. And Splend, I don't know if you want to expand on that just a wee bit, or...
This is another local business, and we're hearing from the CEO and owner, and hopefully I'll have a couple more before the year is out. Just hearing more about people in our community.
All right, excellent. So now the reason why we are all here today, right, our featured speaker, and I didn't actually ask, but there's people that know our speaker a lot better than I do. Would anyone, Linda, Allen, somebody want to introduce our speaker today? Okay. Oh.
Well, I'm very pleased. I'm very pleased to introduce Lara Weber, who's been our music director for the last few years and has helped guide us through this very difficult time. It's been nearly 2 years since we had a concert, and this Saturday will be our first concert coming back after the COVID layoff. And so with that, I want to turn it over to Lara.
Thank you, Alan. Hey, everybody. Thanks, everybody. Where's my Zoom crowd? Is this my Zoom crowd right here? Well, not to neglect the actual people in the room, but hi, everybody on Zoom crowd.
Hi, Laura. Nice to have you.
So thank you so much for the invitation to join you today. It is, I'm seeing for the first time, some of you who I previously had only met, you know, in my tousled morning look at the gym, at Lifestyles, and some of you who I would normally see in the lobby at the Bankhead or places we haven't been able to gather, and certainly here at these meetings, and to know those of you who are not here today, that we can still be connected in this way, that I have the privilege of speaking with you. It's a real honor. Thank you. As of course you've just been told, I'm the music director of the Livermore Amador Symphony Orchestra, which has been serving this community for almost 60 years. We have a big anniversary coming up. And it has been 8 years now that I've been leading this orchestra, which astounds me, half the life of my youngest child. It has been one of the most rewarding and joy-filled experiences of my career to lead this orchestra. It has informed me as a human being. It has made me grow and think differently about things. It has connected me to my own community in a way that I could not have imagined. It's a real privilege. And as we've been preparing to perform this coming weekend, I have, after such a long gap in our ability to gather, I've certainly been reflecting on a lot of things and preparing to speak to you today. In that effort, I've found myself sort of circling around three words, and they are coming up momentarily on a slide, I think, but I'll give you a preview. Renewal, reinvention, and resilience. I guess it's the new 3 R's. Renewal, we're back. The orchestra is returning to the stage. We already have returned to the stage. We are finally presenting our first full symphonic program, our first free family holiday themed program for the first time in 2 years nearly. And we began rehearsing again this fall every Tuesday night, once again, after rigorous, unbelievably challenging decision-making processes that I know many of you have been through in your own personal lives, in your professional lives. For an orchestra, these decisions are exceedingly complex and different. And we've had a willingness to engage and a renewal and a sense of renewed commitment to one another. Just the act of making music together, once again, is such a privilege and an opportunity, and it's reminded us of what's most important about what we do. And it's been a very long road. It's been, you know, at first we couldn't meet at all. Like this connection we have here today, the only connection we really had was on Zoom, and that's really ineffective for a large musical organization. Just doesn't work. If you saw Zoom orchestras online, those weren't really actually happening. That was a sound engineer taking individual videos and spending 36 to 48 hours creating a video. We did what we could of that to remain connected, and we had meetings that were mostly social hours for our orchestra, which is, you know, a group of people who appreciate just their social connection, not only their musical connection. And eventually we graduated. We graduated to this, which I hope I'm getting. Hello, what do I point at? Can I go to the next slide, or can I just push that? I got it, yay. This is my backyard, and that is the string section. Somewhere around a little earlier than this time last year, I looked at my backyard and thought, I'm finally grateful for PG&E. I have a huge easement in my backyard and a lot of space that allowed them to gather, and you can imagine what this was like. I had to strategically place people where the shade was, because you cannot have sun on a varnished string instrument. We played together as a string section. This was very early on in the pandemic. Next up, I think I'm just going to tap this one and hope it works. Okay. We eventually graduated to woodwind ensembles, which are a different ball of wax in a pandemic. Right around this time, the vaccines were available, but not authorized yet for every type of person. And eventually we moved on to the brass section joining me in the backyard. So section by section, we began to reconnect outdoors. And by this point, we were mostly vaccinated and ready to move into the hall just as soon as we could. And because of this wonderful community we live in and the commitment that we have to one another in maintaining the arts, the theater figured out how to reopen to us. On the very first day, I don't know how to advance the slide. There we go. There we are finally back in the theater. That was June 15th. By coincidence, the same day the state reopened. We just happened to have a date in the hall that was held onto with great hope. And we read the symphony of Dvorak, the New World Symphony, which will be our season finale in June. And another time in July, we met again and read Beethoven 7, which will be our sort of return to production symphony this weekend coming up. So then from there, we moved to actual performances. We resumed our rehearsals, and thank you, and had the joy of appearing with Vanessa Williams and her extraordinary band. The drummer and I don't know if you can see us there, it turned out we shared all the same Star Trek jokes. We had this weird plexiglass thing between us, which wasn't about the pandemic, it was about protecting our ears from the volume. And he and I were right next to each other, but had this barrier. And at one point, I just put my hand up and I went like this. And he did it too. And he said, the good of the many outweighs the good of the one. For Trekkies, that's a Spock reference. And my heart just leapt out of my chest. Those are the kinds of connections that cannot exist without live performance. It can't happen. So what did this teach us? What did this sudden separation from the orchestra apart, what did we learn? For me, it taught me, I'm going to push a button and hope it works. To the next slide. It showed me that art equals empathy, that making art together, especially collaborative music making, is by its very nature an empathetic act. It is impossible to collaborate musically without actively listening to other people on a very detailed level, to focus on silence, to have an intuitive sort of collective thinking as a group, as a whole, that we develop through repetition over time in person. It just can't happen any other way. And this ends up developing the skill of knowing, when am I important? When do I need to step up and carry the load? And when do I need to absolutely perfectly, as much as possible, hand it to the next person? When do I need to be subservient to someone else? When do I need to back away and support someone else? And then when do I need to come back in? All of this makes one have to set aside their self-interest. Stop thinking about yourself and only think about other people. Or think about yourself in a very specific context among other people. That's empathy. And that is an incredibly important life skill. It's a skill we have to teach, especially now. We need it now more than ever. It is so easy to think of others as others and not to remember that we are reflections of each other. It is so easy to disassociate from a person if you align them only with what you presume a way of thinking might be that they hold, or an opinion they might have, or how they dress or something. When you are collaborating on a shared piece of art, that is gone. You're all focused on the same thing, and you cannot bring without that human connection forged in reality, you cannot have the sensitivity and the imagination and the collective will to bring these abstract notes and symbols that some composers sometime, today, yesterday, 250 years ago, left on a page like a treasure map to some hidden gem that we're all seeking together. That's what we're doing in a rehearsal. That's what we're bringing to life. We're taking the symbols and notes on a page and we're interpreting them together. It might seem like it's just me because I'm standing on a box, like superimposing some interpretation on everyone. To a certain extent, yeah, but what I do is influenced completely by what's happening in the viola section. What do the horns need right now? What is the quality of sound that our trombone section brings to this beautiful Morton Lauritsen piece we're preparing? Maybe something's happening there that affects the way I originally thought about the music. It's collaborative, and it's not about the self, it's about the whole. That's why we need arts in schools. That's why we need music programs and theater programs, collaborative arts in the schools. And we must continually, it's exhausting, but we can't be exhausted. We must continually renew our commitment to those programs, especially now, because learning a new instrument during the pandemic, really hard to do, not very rewarding on Zoom. So we have work to do to build those programs back up. And so having lost some of that connection, it made us ever more aware of it when we finally could gather again and make music. So how did we do that? We and every orchestra, every band, every choir, every professional orchestra, opera company had to reinvent totally. Everything fell apart, right? The school district had to completely and suddenly reinvent in a similar way, but they had no grace period whatsoever. They didn't get a timeout. They just had to do it. I remain in awe as a parent in this district of how effectively our school district managed that. Crisis can be very cathartic. And it results often in a fundamental reexamination of whatever our longest held beliefs or habits are, or routines and methods. The pandemic required reinvention, of course, on a practical level for orchestras of all types. So I'm speaking now not of so much of our orchestra, but of professional orchestras, that remaining silent would mean the death of the institution and hundreds and hundreds of professional musicians unemployed, and they needed to continue. So as they figured out how to reform testing and masking and physical distancing, this ended up forcing creativity, forcing an open mind, and forcing the abandonment of perfection. Because suddenly, as you saw in those slides, musicians are having to be 6 feet apart. At first, wind players were 16, 12 feet apart because we were still learning what exactly is coming out of that trumpet when you're playing it, right? So if you'd planned a season and your next work was a Mahler symphony, nope, not going to happen. You can't fit that symphony on a stage with distance between players. So suddenly, orchestras everywhere were scrapping their programming and saving what they could, and then looking around, what can we play and how can we play it? And this, as much as we regret having had to do it, forced us to examine our repertory, forced us to look at what are we playing. And at a time, and throughout this, musicians whose jobs depend on performing perfectly, right, are asked to play music that they were just told 3 to 7 days ago that they're going to play. There are rules against that. As a professional musician, you have the right to know what are you going to play and when, so you can prepare and do your job properly. That rule couldn't be observed. We had to make changes very suddenly. Now you're playing music you haven't prepared for weeks ahead of time, and you're doing it very far apart from your neighbor while wearing a mask and a cover over the end of your instrument in some cases. This changes the quality of sound. It changes the pitch in some cases. You can't, the body language isn't, and the conductor is expressionless. Suddenly, I'm conducting, and I will be, like this. So conductors suddenly lose that nuance. Everything has to go right straight out to the end of my baton, all of that feeling. So we suddenly, as musicians, are having to rely and trust our skills. There's no time to perfect anything. You're under adverse conditions. What's going to happen? That is another lesson learned. For me, and I hope for many, the act of making art together is way more important than the perfect delivery of that art. When we get stuck on not failing, we fail. We don't connect. We don't express. We need a high artistic standard. We need to do the best we can. That's why we rehearse. That's why I'm a conductor. This is my favorite part. My favorite part is making it better, right? But in the interests of serving and communicating and expressing and telling a story, not in the interests of, oh, don't screw that up. Not in the interests of perfection. We get hung up in the way we think critically about things on, if a person isn't in a particularly good voice that evening, or if there was a clam in a brass player's performance, or somebody else's performance. We lose sight sometimes, especially as performers, of the expression we're making through the art, even if imperfect. I say this all the time to the orchestra: leave your casualties by the side of the road and keep driving. That's what we have to do as musicians. The music keeps going. So the message here is art is inherently messy, and failure can be beautiful. So for musicians who, on a professional level, they had to trust each other, to trust themselves, to risk. Another aspect of reinventing is that we had to, as the country was reckoning with all manner of reevaluations of itself and its, systemic problems with equality in the country. Arts institutions also looked inward, and as a part of this re-examination of the repertoire, not only for what we can fit on the stage, we suddenly are really looking inwards as arts leaders and recognizing that diversity for its own sake is not what the goal should be. What the goal needs to be is making it clear that this art form is for everyone. There should not be a barrier to it, a perceived or a real barrier. When an audience member comes into a theater and sees no one on the stage that looks like them, it's not really an invitation to come and join. When they hear no music of a composer that is reflective of a culture that is not Germanic, Austrian, probably dead, definitely white male, that's a really limited crowd. And that's the canon. That's the classical music canon. For some reason, even though I am a product of Mr. Rogers' generation, his first episode aired on my birthday, okay? Even I, as this, I was desegregated in Seattle, I feel like I've had this awareness of the need to be inclusive and was in an inclusive society. I did not realize that, partly because my art form, since its inception, has not been inclusive. It's not as though, as a society, when we began to address civil rights inequities, suddenly people of color started composing. They have always composed, and they have always composed classical symphonic music right alongside Mozart, Brahms, Elgar, Holst, Mahler, all from the beginning. Women, Every kind of person has written this music, and most of those people were shut out from the beginning, not just lately. So now orchestras are really beginning to understand this. And when they have been forcibly divorced from their subscription model and planned programming, and suddenly they're making space on their schedules because they have to, they're also recognizing, oh my gosh, we have this incredible body of work by Samuel Coleridge Taylor, a Black British composer who was a contemporary of Elgar and Holst. Why didn't I learn about him in Conservatory, Oberlin Conservatory? What about Carlos Chavez, the Dean of Mexican Music, whose music was hugely, richly influenced by the music of Bach, and who was a primary influence on Aaron Copland, the Dean of American Music. Silvestre Revueltas is the Igor Stravinsky of Mexican composers. Louise Farrenc, 18th century classical, late Baroque, early classical woman, wrote incredible symphonies that are being performed alongside Beethoven now by major American orchestras. Florence Price is having a moment. Her vast vocabulary of sound, there's a huge body of her work that's being picked up now and played very regularly by orchestras. This is just now happening, and all of these people have been around for generations. I could go on and on and on. I have lists and lists of music. I'll never have enough concert opportunities to play this extraordinary music. This is something the Livermore Amador Symphony is also addressing. For a long time, I know I felt a little like, well, we only give 4 concerts a year. We don't have a whole bunch of room for this. What? That's silly. It only enhances our appreciation and understanding of the music we love to hear music we have never heard before. And it takes more than one hearing to hear it, to appreciate it. Certainly Beethoven was not immediately appreciated. So I just share this with you because it's a process that I've been going through personally and been watching my colleagues figure out. And I think we've really started to open the doors in a way that recognizes we needed to have been more inclusive from the beginning. So there's no time like the present, let's just do it. And there's so much beautiful music to share. So last R, resilience. Here we are. There he is, Mr. Resilience, the most 2020 of all composers, or 2021 maybe I should say. Beethoven's 250th birthday got canceled by this pandemic. Poor guy has become the symbol of resilience in classical music, not just because of his incredibly difficult life, but obviously because of the character of much of his music. This is the centerpiece. His 7th symphony is the centerpiece of our upcoming program. It's important to remember, we think of his work in its finished form after a couple of centuries of idolizing it as perfect. Not only perfect, but also revolutionary, right? Would you change a note? No. Maybe the horns would. But what's really important is to remember, extraordinarily, Beethoven wrote most of his most famous and recognizable music after or almost while he was completely deaf. He had almost totally lost his hearing by the time he was conducting the premiere of the 7th Symphony. There are written records from members of the orchestra who played the premiere of that wonderful symphony, who wrote letters and documented the experience. Beethoven at that point in time could not hear anything but the loudest sounds the orchestra was making, and we're not certain he could hear those. He could feel the vibrations, and he often held on to the podium or the piano to feel it. He could feel the floor vibrating. He could see them playing, of course, but mostly he was conducting them from his oral imagination of his own symphony. He could still compose because he knew all the rules. He had barely hearing composer for long enough and had studied so much, he knew that he could hear something in his head and write it down. He could still play the piano and see the formation of his fingers and know what he was doing. But in conducting that rehearsal, the notes that people wrote about it, there were times when he was way ahead of the orchestra while they were playing. He was listening to the orchestra in his head and would not realize where they were until he could see that what they were doing was not matching what he was hearing in his head. Sometimes, according to Louis Spohr, the concertmaster and a noted musicologist of the time, he would shout at a forte and not know he was shouting to urge on the orchestra. So perfect? No. Genius? Yes. Messy? For sure. That concert was an enormous success, and the symphony is possibly his most popular. It's hard to compete with the Fifth or the Ninth, but very popular work. In the context of his times, it was written when he was depressed, he had no money, he was unrequited in love for the gajillionth time. It was presented at a war memorial for severely injured veterans. A war was going on. Playing it now in the context of our current extremely challenging times, it's a reflection constantly on its meaning and for the amount of joy that this symphony brings when it was written at such a time and through such arduous tumult in the composer himself. It is amazing. My favorite description of this symphony is joy written out on the page. And that was from Susan Ivey in the first violin section of the Livermore Amador Symphony. She said, I love this piece. It's like joy on the page. So, just a couple words about the piece itself. It's a dance symphony. It's all rhythm all the time. The first movement, the rhythm is a standard jig rhythm. Dum, 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 dum. But it's way more than that. It might be a light, sort of gaiety, just the way I just sang it, or it could be full of tension and power. It can be fragmented, all over the orchestra. And there's one moment where everything stops. And you really notice that when it hasn't, up to that point, stopped. The second movement is about as simple as you can get. 3 notes. Even if you're not a person who reads music, just looking at how simple that is, it's so repetitious, the pattern, and just 3 notes, that is constant in the second movement of this symphony. It is mesmerizing. I don't have words for it. The emotional experience of this movement is so unique to every listening and listener, I don't even want to try. I will say that persistent rhythm creates a sense of inevitability immediately in your ear, even if you don't know it, that then he plays with in your expectation and layering over different melodies and sounds. When he premiered the work, the audience was so enthralled by that music, he had to repeat it. He had to give an encore at the premiere. And it became a movement that was inserted into all his other symphonies for a while. I know how it'll be a hit. Let's play that slow movement in this one. The third movement and fourth movement are also dance movements. The third one is kind of a schizophrenic dance movement with I didn't accuse Jim Hartman, our second horn player, of actually being this way, but it was Clara Schumann's dad, Friedrich Wieck, thought that the horn player was drunk in the third movement because there's a moment where he seems to go off on his own playing just E, D sharp E, E, D sharp E, over this beautiful melody. There's one person going, but that's Beethoven. And the last movement is if we do our job right, a frenzied burst of joyous enthusiasm that should, kind of blow the roof off the building. Interestingly, though, we must not be frenzied when we play frenzied music. That's another collaborative thing. We are super concentrated and very controlled, but the effect is, oh my God, for everyone else, we hope. So there's more to it than just Beethoven. This is the concert where we finally get to feature our harpist, Constance Koo, a tremendous professional trained in Cleveland, plays all over the country and a lot of Bay Area orchestras, and has been supported by our Symphony Guild as our symphony harpist for 5 or 6 years now. She will play the transcendent and transparent music of Debussy in her sacred and profane dances. And preceded by that is members of our brass section. Our entire brass section will play a fanfare, La Paris, written by Paul Dukas, famous for his Sorcerer's Apprentice, but he also wrote a lot of other things, including this fanfare. And then we turn to the spirituality of this season in the very mysticism and music of American composer Morton Lordson in his O Magnum Mysterium. So that's our program. And earlier that same day, we will present our free family concert with members of the Valley Dance Theater on stage with us, and we hope as much of an audience as we can generate. We know it may take time for folks to feel really excited about coming out into a crowd again, but we are so grateful to be back. We are so grateful to know that we can offer this once again. Preview of coming attractions in the new year in February. You'll get quite a show-stopping concert on February, I think it's the 12th. I really hope so. Yes, there it is. Not one, not two, but 4 young soloists, the winners of 2020 and 2021 Young Concerto Competition. They'll each play a movement from a major concerto. And finally, Faith Alpha and I get to collaborate. She and I have been together in schools and at gyms, and our children have grown up together, and we've looked for this chance for years. She will narrate the words of Lincoln in Copeland's Lincoln Portrait. I don't know if any of you caught her one-woman show to start the Bankhead season in September. She's just an extraordinary, not just a great actress and comedian, but also a great community colleague and supporter and activist. So it's thank you for listening to me for so long. I got off on a tangent, but it was a Beethoven tangent, so I suppose that's okay. I can't thank you enough for your support and everything that you do for this community, for, in particular, our arts programs and our schools, and your global attention as well. I'm so happy to see you and be with you all. Thank you for the opportunity, and I hope to see you, as many of you as can make it, this Saturday. I'll put my face back on.
Thank you, Laura, for joining us.
Thanks
Do
for
you have
the
any
help.
questions for Laura?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Questions?
Questions are
Can you
good.
stick around for a minute?
Yeah.
You got any questions? Any questions? Questions? Oh, Lynn, what do you got? Oh, mic coming.
What part of the Zoom saga will you continue after we're completely together?
Personally or with the orchestra?
With the orchestra.
To be honest, not much. It's possible that, there may be, I think some hybrid form of our board meetings will still happen that way. We never tried to be a Zoom orchestra. It is just, as you know, from trying to sing the national anthem together, it just doesn't work. I think we'll resort to the outdoors if we need to again, but hopefully we won't need to now that we have the tools we need to keep going. So
We'll still have on our website the productions we put together
Yes.
during the down year, and some
Yes.
of those are a lot of fun.
yeah, thank you.
Including
Mr. Frank here did a lot of the work on that.
Celebration,
Right.
which was not in person, but was in video productions that we put together.
Beethoven being Beethoven, we'll just celebrate his 251st. Yeah.
There you go.
Yep.
Any folks out on Zoom? I don't really have eyes on. Are there any questions out in the Zoom audience?
I'm looking and haven't seen any.
Okay. All right. Going. Lara, thank you.
Thank you.
For joining us.
Sure.
Appreciate it. One more question.
Where do we find your Zoom pieces that you did? Are they on you?
Website, there's a couple of them. One of them is, oh, Zoom audience. Okay. One of the options to select is called The Orchestra Performs. And on that is everything that we've done. Vineyard Vibes, which I failed to mention. We were one of the first people presented by LVPAC when they figured out how to do outdoor concerts beautifully. The Beethoven project that Alan mentioned. We did Peter and the Wolf on video for the schools. That was huge. And a lot of our musicians stepped up and performed just from their homes. And plenty of other stuff too. So it's there. Sleigh Ride's my favorite. But it's better in person.
Nice. Well, thank you again, Lara, for joining us. I was struck by how nice it would have been during COVID to have been one of your neighbors. And I was also struck by the similarities between being an artist and being a Rotarian, and how for us, sometimes it's the effort and it's not perfection, right? We seek joy in the actually act of doing good, and it doesn't always work out perfectly, but we mean well, right? So, okay, so Lara, thank you very much. Anything else? Anything? Then I think I'm going to call it a wrap for today. And I'll move the bell a little further away from the microphone.
Good job.